Welcome, everybody. I'm going to give our attendees a few minutes to log in. The audience participants can't get online until right at 3 o'clock when the meeting starts. So I always like to give them a couple of minutes to be able to sort of shuffle in and think about whether they want to comment on something, an item that is not on the agenda. So if you are an attendee that's just tuning in and you would like to speak to something that is not on the agenda, now would be a good time to raise your hand so we can see how many folks we have that want to speak. In the meantime, to the ex-cappers that are here, I just wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to see the informational item that was attached, which is the memorandum from staff about mixing hybrids and underpasses for Charleston and Meadow. So hopefully everyone had a chance to look at that. We can talk about it. We'll probably talk about it when we deliberate, but I just want it because it's just an informational item. There's really nothing else to discuss, but wanted to make sure that everyone saw it. Okay, again, if you're an attendee who would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, now would be a great time to raise your hand. Okay, I see at least one person raise their hand. Phew, I thought this was going to be an anomaly. Okay, I'll give us one more minute and then we'll go. If not.
And I can do roll call when you're ready.
Oh, yes, please. Let's do the roll call while we're waiting.
Okay. Okay, Gregory Braille.
I'm here.
Phil Burton.
Here.
Tony Carrasco.
Tony's here. Yeah.
Yes.
In-Yang Cho.
And it looks like we might have lost her.
Yeah, I thought I saw her too. Okay. Not here at the minute.
Okay.
Larry Klein. I saw Larry too.
Yeah, but he's not there now. I think his camera's shut off. There he is.
Larry is here. Okay. Nadia Nayak.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
Here.
Dave Shen.
Here.
Carrie Templeton. Okay.
Nadia, this is In-Yang. I'm here.
Hi, In-Yang. Okay, great. We thought you were here and we lost you. So thank you for letting us know.
Yeah, I'm driving, so I'm just being
I can
less vocal today. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Here you have a quorum.
Okay, thanks. Wonderful. Okay, welcome everybody. Looks like I've got, if there's any member of the public who'd like to speak to an item that is not on the agenda, again, this is, so if you have something to say about the noise and vibration report or about the new renderings for the Churchill partial underpass or the Meadow Charleston underpass, please put your hand down and save that comment for afterwards. We are looking for things that are not on the agenda. If you'd like to speak about something else, it looks like I still have 2 hands raised, so you will each have 2 minutes and we'll go from there.
Okay, we have 3 speakers. Richard Perkey, I will unmute you. You may speak. You may need to unmute yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for all the hard work you've done. As you move to the phase where you're going to consider the various options and weigh them, I've been looking at the options for Churchill. I live in the old Palo Alto neighborhood. And I think the option that offers the best transportation options for all modes across the traffic for all For crossing the grade crossing is the closure to vehicles, building an underpass for pedestrians and bikes, and for with the mitigations, I think it resolves for the best bang for the buck, the cost-effective way to make sure that all traffic can move across the corridor safely. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. The caller with the phone number ending in 262, you may unmute yourself.
So you probably read or heard in the press that the Caltrain sales tax is not going to make it on the ballot in November, and that's fine. It's not an issue. Caltrain is not going anywhere anytime soon, but we're finally going to get a chance to do something about governance and get this thing back under control. The other thing I want to talk about is when you look at the propaganda on the sales tax, they somehow came up with this concept that the VTA will no longer have to be contributing to Caltrain, and somehow the sales tax is going to be making up for it, which means Caltrain is not going to be any better off than it was before. Well, that's absolutely false, because you're in Palo Alto, you live in Santa Clara County, and I know most of you were probably too young to vote for this back in 2000, but we actually voted taxes to support Caltrain back in 2000, and we did again back in Measure B in 2016. I think there's over $300 million there to support Caltrain. So this concept that is somehow this money is, it's no longer going to be going to Caltrain is absolutely nonsensical. The other thing I'd like to bring to your attention is that, as you probably heard, MTC had a planning meeting last Friday, where they basically discussed Plan B area, the two phases. And the reason the two phases is they got $400 billion worth of projects, but they've got less than $200 billion worth of funding. So now they're gonna split in two halves. Is what's going to be done between now and 2035, and the second half between 35 and 50. And what they're going to do, I mean, this is evolving, but in September, they are going to come up with a policy and decide which projects are going to be basically get done in the first 15 years. And there are some Caltrain grade separations in there. So I just thought I'd bring that out for your attention. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. I guess the order changed. The next person who may speak is the caller. Wait a second. Sorry, he was 262?
Yes,
Sorry.
I think it was.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I got confused here.
It's okay.
The next person to speak is Karen Kolinsky. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, I live on East Meadow, and I'll leave comments on the Charleston alternatives to those who live in that area. I read with interest the memo on mixing underpass and hybrid alternatives at Charleston and Meadow, which is included as an informational item on today's agenda. I would like to request that future fact sheets and town hall information include a separate option for a mixed Meadow Charleston solution with hybrid for Meadow combined with underpass for Charleston. While it's difficult to prioritize various competing criteria, in my opinion, the Meadow hybrid option combined with a Charleston underpass option has the following advantages over the underpass for both. One, lower cost. Hybrid option costs about 60% of the underpass option. Two, better connectivity between Meadow and Alba, since hybrid has 8 turning movements compared to 3 for the underpass, which would potentially drive traffic into neighborhood streets. And 3, the hybrid Meadow option has 0 property acquisitions compared to the Meadow underpass, which acquires 1 apartment building with 14 units and 1 single family home. On the other hand, keeping the Meadow underpass, as included with the underpass for both Meadow and has the following advantages over the Meadow hybrid option. The underpass provides better safety for bikes and peds by providing a path that's well separated from car traffic. And the underpass minimizes changes to visual impact by keeping trains at street level compared to hybrid, which would raise tracks 15 feet, which especially impacts those living along the tracks on Park Boulevard. In summary, please add a separate option for mixing Meadow Hybrid with Charleston Underpass solutions. And thank you, ex-cappers, for your hard work and commitment. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for that. I don't see any more speakers. I think that's it. Just a point of order. I just want to acknowledge that Carrie is here and wanted to see if my amazing technical team can help us move Carrie into the panelist section of this Zoom call instead of in the attendees. That would be awesome. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, Nadia, you're in the text, but there's a issue. We're having a little bit of the issue of promoting her from attendee to panelist. So hopefully Sylvia or Nate can help us with that.
Okay, well, just for the record, Carrie is here and listening. She's just in the wrong section at the moment. So, okay, awesome.
It looks like I can at least allow her to talk. Oh.
Okay.
Maybe we can just have her raise her hand when she wants to speak, and then we can allow her to talk when appropriate.
Okay, great. Yeah, it looks like because she's joining us by phone, that's why they can't promote you for some reason, Carrie. So I think that might be the best workaround for now. Okay. I just wanted to ask, based on what someone said in public comment, if the staff might be able to give us in the future an update on, or keep us informed on what's happening with the MTC stuff, and is that something that involves XCAP, making sure that council is basically aware of whatever it is happening at MTC, I guess would be my suggestion. I think that's all I wanted to ask staff to do. It doesn't really involve XCAP, but I think whatever's happening in terms of grade separation projects potentially being funded out of MTC, if the next time we have a council update, that would be something I'd recommend that staff could maybe bring to the council's attention. That'd be awesome. Okay, so we're now on item number 3, which is a discussion of the noise and vibration report. And so we have Paul Burge with us here today. And Paul, I will let you take it away.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Just a quick question. I did have a short PowerPoint presentation which went over some of the changes between the draft report and the draft final, but someone suggests I might not be able to use that since it wasn't submitted ahead of time. So I could also just scroll through the report if that was more appropriate.
Yeah, however you want to talk through it works fine.
You think it's okay to use PowerPoint? Then there's really no new information in there. It's just summarizing the changes in the report.
Yeah, I think procedurally, as long as you make the report available afterwards, that's
Sure.
to send it to staff, then that's fine, because we have both versions, right? So.
Okay, well, let me see if I can share the correct screen here. Okay, are you seeing my screen?
I am not.
Let's see. Okay, how about now?
Yes, now we are.
Okay. All right. Are you seeing the, sorry, this is so confusing. Are you seeing the one with the notes on it?
We are seeing your notes on it as well, yes.
Okay, I'm not sure how to keep that from happening.
You can swap, if you go in the PowerPoint,
Yep.
you can swap your display screens in the PowerPoint. It's usually on the notes slide, I think. There's a spot at the display settings at the top there with the arrow down. See it? Over to the left. There you go.
Okay, so.
It's usually there.
Sorry, folks.
No worries.
So you're still seeing the one with the notes?
Yeah, you might have to unshare and reshare the right screen then once you have it.
Okay, let's try that then. Okay, hold on. Is that changing anything?
It's not there yet. There's a little lag time. Yeah, we're not seeing it, Paul. You're not sharing your screen.
Okay, let me try this. No, that's not doing it either. Just
Paul, you can still go through the slides if you don't go in a presentation mode. Maybe that'll be easier. Not ideal, but better than nothing.
okay. I'm sorry, folks. I'm getting
It's
a little.
okay. And actually, Paul, while you're working that out, I just wanted to, Carrie, since I know you're listening, they sent you an email with the links for you to be able to be a panelist. So if you're able to join us that way, that would be great. If not, if you wanted to speak, Carrie, you need to raise your hand by pressing *9. So again, this is just for Carrie so that she can participate in the discussion. So yeah, Paul, if you want to just go back to sharing whatever you had on the screen, I think that might be better.
Okay. Okay, are you?
Yep, that works.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
All right, so this is, we just, is back in June 2nd, I believe, we did a review of our draft noise study report for this comparative analysis for the different grade crossing alternatives. So this is an update of that based upon some comments we had gotten from this committee. And this is basically a list of what you asked us to change or reconsider. So first was to replace electric locomotives with the new EMU units. Second was to reassess the passenger train speeds in accordance with the Caltrain projected speed profiles. Then increase daily total and peak traffic hour, train events for, to 114 trains per day and 16 trains per peak hour, again, per the Caltrain electrification study. Consider use of 6-foot parapet noise barriers on the closure and underpass alternatives, similar to the ones that were used for Viaduct and hybrid. Provide an additional table showing the relative noise reduction for each alternative in addition to the actual noise level. And revise or remove the combined summary table at the end of the report. And we did each one of those. So first, with the EMU units, we found out shortly before the original report that in fact they were proposing or planning to use electrical multiple unit trains, EMUs, rather than electric locomotives for future use. And so we went ahead and did that. We tried to get acoustical data from the manufacturer for those. It was not available through either them or Caltrain. But we did, as a fallback, we used the same reference information that was used in the 2014 Caltrain electrification study, which are shown below. And we made sure that those would, if we use those coefficients and reference levels, that they would in fact meet the Caltrain specification for the new EMUs, and they do. As you can see in the table there, there's two specifications. One is up to 50 miles an hour, one is up to 80. And in each case, our predicted levels were at least slightly less than the allowed level. So we thought that that was appropriate. We did take a look at the speeds. I'm not sure if you can see this, it's a little light, but we were provided with these speed profiles. This shows the train speed as a function of location, and it goes up and down the corridor. We did max those out at 80 miles an hour. Then we identified our 3 target grade crossings and did confirm that for each one of those, the train should be at or near, the passenger trains, EMU should be at or near 80 miles an hour. So we basically used 80 miles an hour for all the passenger trains and 50 miles an hour for all the freight. For the train operations, we did originally use the existing traffic of a daily total of 92 trains per day, passenger trains, 8 during the day and 12 at night. and freight service of 3 nighttime ops. We did revise this to the projected 2040 service of 114 daily total Caltrain trains and the same number of freight trains. And this assumed basically the full build out or the full replacement of the EMU units. Now, there were some numbers in there that were quite a bit higher, and these included high-speed train events, but we left those out for a couple of reasons. One is that at this point, it's not certain if, for one, high-speed rail will actually get to this part of the corridor. And also, if that would essentially double the amount of trains, and we felt that really the gigantic increase in the number of events of trains might actually tend to wash out or really de-emphasize the relative differences between these different alternatives. And basically maybe even eliminating most of the benefit from removing the horn sounding. So we elected to leave those out of this analysis. And I think that's it. So we did basically change the train speeds for the passenger trains from 50 to 80, and the freight remained the same. Regarding these parapet noise barriers, we were asked to consider using those same 6-foot noise barriers because they were fairly effective for the viaduct and the hybrid alternatives, and they were already part of those alternatives, to also consider using those for closure and overpass alternatives. And so we essentially added 2 new alternatives, which were underpass with barrier and closure with barrier. All right. You also asked us to include a separate table, an additional table. Right now, the table that we have in there that shows the predicted levels, shows the actual predicted levels for each one of the alternatives. And some folks said they thought it would be beneficial if we could show that same data, except as the noise reduction over existing. So we added an additional table just right after the first one that shows the relative noise reduction as opposed to the actual noise level. And that's in the report. There was quite a bit of discussion, probably more discussion than everything else involved, about the summary table that we had in the original report. And this is the one where we made an attempt to try to combine the assessment for the operational noise, operational vibration, and construction noise and vibration into kind of a single ranking. And I think some of the comments and concerns about that is that the weighting that you would give to, we actually gave more of a weighting to the operational noise and less of a weighting to operational vibration and noise and construction noise and vibration. But after some discussion and some inner reflection, I think I came to the decision that really any attempt to try to combine those together into a single assessment would be flawed, and that it included some judgment or kind of value judgment based upon whoever was doing the combination of which of these aspects were more or less important than the others. And after thinking through, I think maybe that wasn't so technically defensible. So I think it was best to just leave that out and leave that to your committee to make those assessments and weigh those assessments independently, along with everything else you had to consider: cost, and traffic, safety, those things. So we just decided to leave that table out. I also got some, I did have a question originally from Keith, I think, on one of the questions from the last meeting, and a couple of follow-up emails. And Keith, I apologize for not responding to those emails, but I was under the impression that might not have been appropriate to do. But I did want to include a little extra identification information on that. Keith had suggested that there would be some radiated sound as the train went over the viaduct, perhaps, and that in fact is probably true. But I think that we had included, and I wanted to kind of express that there are a couple of different, actually several different types of viaduct structures. Some of the older style, and not old like 100 years old, but old like in the 60s and 70s, were primarily metal. And they, in fact, can radiate structural vibration noise much more efficiently than some others. That's because they're fairly lightweight and they're fairly flexible and they have very little damping. But in fact, more modern structures which are typically, and from basically some of the photos that renderings we were given, and just plus the way that more modern structures, rail structures, are designed and built these days, are based more on reinforced concrete structures. They tend to have much greater mass and much better internal damping characteristics than older style metal structures, and would help to reduce the structure related noise. So it would probably be, now there might still be some noise, it'll probably be lower in frequency and much lower in level, maybe 10 to 20 dB lower. And I guess it's our opinion, without doing an additional $100,000 study that did finite element modeling and everything else, that generally these types of structures, more beefy reinforced concrete structures, structure radiated noise is really just not a problem. And so that's what we kind of built into our assumption, that it would be built out of the more modern structure, and it would take into consideration things like a ballasted track or isometric rail supports, so that there would be much less vibration coming down into the structure. In fact, I did include a couple of pictures just as examples. So this one on the left, this is be typical of a metal viaduct structure or bridge structure, and you do see these around. I mean, and this is an electrified one, as you can see, and these things, they are very lightly damped, and it's a lighter weight than the more modern structure, so they do tend to have their own noise source, and it can be, some of the studies I've seen, it can be 15 to 20 dB louder than a corresponding modern structure we show here on the right. You can see this. I was surprised if I found a picture of one which is very, very similar to the one that's depicted in the drawings. So you can see it's much more massive, has much more mass to it, so it is less likely to have a vibratory resonance, sharp resonance. You can also see that, in fact, in this one here, and is suggested in the drawings that we have for the proposed design, they actually do have some bridge bearings in there, which supply some additional damping and isolation device. So it would have to be built into the design that these would not vibrate, but most of these modern structures are built that way. In fact, they even usually have ballasted track on the top to help reduce the vibration right there at the wheel rail interface. All right, and this is another table that's already in the report, and I highlighted in red the things that changed from the original report. So just to repeat, all passenger trains are now 80 miles an hour. Train consists are for 6-car EMUs with 3 powered cars rather than the electric locomotives. Daily trains have increased to 114, which is 99 during the day, 15 at night, same 3 nighttime freights. And I think we increased from 10 to 16 the number of peak hour passenger trains. And also down here under the parapet barrier, we included here that there would be approximately a 12 decibel reduction for wheel rail noise plus propulsion for the EMUs. And that's important. One of the big differences from a noise standpoint between an electric locomotive and an EMU, at least this EMU, is that the motors are located at a lower elevation, kind of just down there near the wheels. So the noise from the traction power motor would be mitigated by that 6-foot barrier, where if it was up near the top of the train, like an electric locomotive, it would not have been mitigated. So that makes a difference. And just referencing those number of operations back to the Caltrans electrification study. All right, so this was the original summary table from the original report. Just as a reminder, and this showed that the preferred option, strictly from a noise standpoint, of course, for the underpass, for the Churchill grade crossing would be the underpass. It's slightly better numbers than some of the other ones there. And for the Meadow Charleston, it would be the tunnel with at-grade freight. And just as a reminder, the reason that this one won as opposed to the passenger and freight in the tunnel is that this one, in addition to removing all of the passenger train noise by being in the tunnel, it also reduced much of the road noise by cutting Alma Street from 4 lanes down to 2. Okay, so just as a reminder, for Churchill, underpass was a preferred option, and for Meadow Charleston, it was tunnel with at-grade freight. So now with all the new changes, you see there's a few more options in here because we added the width barrier options, of course. For Churchill, the new option, preferred option, went from underpass to underpass with barrier, and you see that improved actually quite a bit on the average from about 65 dB to about 59 dB. And for the Meadow Charleston, it actually remained the same. Even though the Viaduct and the hybrid got better, overall the tunnel with at-grade freight was better. And maybe worth noting, if you look just at the first row west, the hybrid actually does a little bit better, but that's because that particular receiver location benefits from the fact that the hybrid serves as a noise barrier for the road noise on Alma, but that's the only place where that happens, not for the other ones. So when you look at the average, it's actually the tunnel with at-grade that is the preferred alternative. All right, so also just one other thing I wanted to mention is that this, you might look and just say, well, this didn't change much. Well, it didn't, and that's because of the changes that we implemented on this one. We went from the electric to the EMU, and that was a pretty good reduction, both in terms of the train itself is quieter, and the train also received a better benefit from those from the options that had the 6-foot parapet barrier. And then the other changes, including more trains daily over the course of the day, and also faster speeds, going from 50 to 80 miles an hour. So those three things in combination kind of tended to cancel each other out. So you had one thing that was pointing it down in one direction, and the other two were pointing it back up. And when it came out, the combined effect was mostly canceled each other out. So just conclusions, and these, again, this is from the results of the changes that we made for this draft final report. We had several updates in the assumptions based upon the XCAP comments, including future train types, daily events, speeds, alternatives. Updated tables included new predicted noise levels, but the results were actually fairly similar. We didn't make any changes to the qualitative assessment on the operational vibration and construction noise and vibration. None of the things we were asked to change really had any bearing on that assessment. And then we removed the combined summary table. That assessment was better left to XCAP together with other non-noise considerations. And I think that's my report. Hello?
Yep, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to find my mute button. All right, thank you, Paul. So XCappers, I'm going to open it up to you guys. I see that Carrie has made the transition to panelist, yay. And so I'll ask you guys to put your hands up so you can make some comments or ask Paul some questions. First hand I see is Greg Braille, followed by Tony Carrasco. Greg.
Hey there, thanks for making the changes. I really appreciate having a detailed report on this. You said two things that I'm afraid might worry people outside the XCAP and might worry me. One is, can we go back to your speed chart in which you concluded that 80 miles an hour is sufficient? Because we didn't get it beforehand. I didn't get a good look at it. I'm going to take my glasses off and everyone's going to have to look at my forehead. Because I know that we have trains that stop in Palo Alto and don't stop again until they get to Mountain View.
Right.
So it looks on the chart, if I'm reading this right, that those trains could theoretically reach 110 miles per hour.
Well, I was told that regardless of this chart, that the maximum speed for the EMUs would be around 80 miles an hour.
Okay.
And so while some of them, according to this chart, could, from a performance standpoint, from their performance characteristics, I think this one tops out at like 110 miles an hour.
Right.
But I was told separately that they would max out at 80. So I kind of drew a red line across there saying that's as fast as they were going to get. But obviously the fact that I kind of drew in the vertical red lines here for where the grade crossings were.
Yeah.
By the time you get to there, the trains are mostly up to that 80 miles an hour. So we conservatively said they'd probably be running at their maximum level at that point.
I think at some point, we just need to. My understanding of Caltrain, and I think what Nadia's told us before, is that they don't intend to raise the speed limit. But it sounds like with the EMUs, they technically have the capability to make the trains go 110 between as they go through Meadow and Charleston, and that might be something we need to get an answer on outside of this process.
Well, that's
maybe
an
less relevant for noise and more relevant for safety.
Yeah, that's operational. Also, I didn't. This chart here was not included in the actual report.
Okay.
this was just a double check. I wanted to make sure that I was a little concerned that if some of the grade crossings were very close to a station, that some of the trains might still be accelerating or deaccelerating. But it looks like, and Churchill looks like it's just barely fit right in the middle there. So, so I just wanted to kind of confirm that 80 miles an hour was reasonable for the new train speeds.
Is this a chart that you made based on the acceleration characteristics of the EMUs, or is this a chart Caltrain gave you that said
Caltrain gave me the chart?
Are going to go. Okay.
I drew in the red bits.
Okay.
So I drew in the horizontal line that caps the speed at 80, and then I drew in the vertical lines that identify the location for Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston grade crossings.
Okay. I guess from a noise perspective, if it turned out the trains were going through Meadow and Charleston at 110 instead of 80, that's significantly more wind noise, I guess, right?
I'm sorry, significantly more.
What would the impact be if we had trains from the noise perspective of trains coming through Meadow and Charleston at 110?
Generally, the faster, well, there's actually two effects there. When the trains are going faster at their maximum level, they're louder because the wheel rail noise increases as a function of speed.
Yeah.
That's mitigated somewhat by the cumulative average effect because they're not there as long. Their duration is shorter. Overall, the effect is that when you increase the speed, they do increase in the noise level. So if it went from 80 to 90, there might be another decibel level or something.
Okay.
That I didn't do that detailed of an analysis here, but yeah, and that's part of it. When we raced from 50 to 80, that did result in a pretty significant reduction that was partially offset by the quieter trains and to begin with for the EMUs.
Okay.
All right.
I mean, I recall from other meetings of XCAP, I think Caltrain's made it clear that they have no plans to run trains faster than 85, but it's interesting to know that they could. And that may be just something we need to keep in the backs of our minds. So I'll drop that, but thanks for sharing it. And I don't have any additional questions. So
well,
thanks.
I will also note that the speedometer on my car goes up to 130 miles an hour. But
right. I know. Yeah.
I don't usually get it up.
Whether your car can go that fast is a good question. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. I see Tony Carrasco followed by Keith.
So I had the same questions as Greg did, so I won't repeat. I wanted to thank the consultant for a clearer, cleaner report.
So I maybe now is a good time to add in. I'm struggling to find the document while attending this meeting, but I will try to find it for you guys afterwards. But I think Caltrain had said, I believe, and I will find an actual piece of paper that says this, is that after electrification, they intend to continue to operate at 79 miles an hour, but they do eventually have the ability to operate at 110. There's a magic number at 125, where when a train goes over 125, a grade step has to be built. And so that is the reason why even high-speed rail, if it came on the peninsula, is restricted at operating below that, because they can't afford to pay for the grade separations. And so ain't nobody going faster than that number.
Right.
But I believe that the intent for electrified Caltrain, especially in the near term, was not to go above 79 miles an hour. But I'm pretty sure that that's in a fact sheet, and I'm hoping to find that and try to have it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I think what this is showing us is that we wouldn't have to worry about them. They would not even be able to reach much more, about 90 at any of our grade separations, except for those express trains that that start in Palo Alto and then would be barreling through. So okay, so thanks, Nadia.
Yeah, and I was told that even the express trains would be limited to 79 or 80 miles an hour.
That's what Nadia is getting for us. Yeah, thanks.
Also, just one other thing: if we did decide we're going to raise from 80 to 90 or 80 to 100, that would be, in terms of the relative differences between the alternatives, that might get somewhat washed out because they would be going faster for all the alternatives. Right, so the difference that would create between the alternatives might be minimal, I would think.
Okay.
I'd just like to make, Nadia, can I speak? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'll get to you, Phil. So Tony, you don't have anything further, is that correct? I think you're muted, but I'm assuming that's a yes. Okay, so I'll go for Keith next, and then Phil, I'll get you next.
Phil, do you have a follow-up question?
No, more follow-up comments, very brief.
Go ahead.
The EMUs can accelerate and decelerate considerably faster than diesel trains. So they could hit 8 peak speed, whatever that is, in a shorter run length than current diesel trains can. That's my comment.
Yes, in fact, I would agree that you see that on these speed curves at all these grade crossings, the train can get up to its kind of revenue limit of 80 miles an hour, but that's probably not true for the current diesel locomotives. They would have a different speed profile than this, I think.
Go ahead, Keith.
Okay. Very good work. Overall, you did a very nice job. I have some questions on the resonance. Thank you for addressing that. But I have a quick question. You mentioned there were 3 effects that by and large kind of cancel each other out. What were those 3 effects again?
Well, they tended to work against each other. Switching from the electric locomotives to the EMU units, if that was the only change, all the numbers would have decreased because the EMU units produce less noise per pass by. So that would have reduced all the levels. Increasing the speeds, as regardless of what type of vehicle you use, wheel rail noise increases as a function of speed. So increasing from 50 to 80 miles an hour would cause the noise to go up. And then the total number of trains, which we originally assumed we were using the current 92 Caltrain events per day that went up to 114, that would also tend to raise the overall the peak hour levels, because we went from 10 to 16 trains per hour assumption for the peak hour, and from 92 to 114 trains total per day. So the change from electric locomotive to EMU puts noise levels down. The increase in speed pushed them up, and the increase in number of events also pushed them up. So you had 1 down, 2 ups, so they at least partially canceled each other out.
Okay. Now I have questions about the resonance. I mean, reinforced concrete only has 5% damping in it. So granted, that's a lot better than steel, but still only 5%. You know, is the glass 5% full or 95% empty?
I'm not sure that that's linear of a conversion. Also, I think that the way these work, not only do they have a greater damping effect, but they have more isolation effects as well. Most of these structures have a ballast track. That means they have usually concrete sleepers laid into kind of a gravel bed that helps reduce the vibration. And they actually do that to help preserve the structure, because the structure doesn't move that much, and if you bolted the tracks directly to the structure, eventually it would end up destroying the structure. So they put something in there so there's some isolation between the tracks and the slab surface, and that also helps reduce the vibration actually pushing its way down to the deck and into the columns. There's also other isolating devices. Let me see if I can pull that. You can see these bridge bearing pads between the top of the column and the bottom of the box girder. That also helps to reduce the vibration that goes down into there. But 5% damping is not that bad. I mean, I don't think it's the linear that 95% of the energy gets through, but it helps to flatten, kind of like we've been seeing with the coronavirus curves, flattening the curve. You know, it keeps, the idea, everybody wears a mask and it helps reduce that big peak and it spreads it out. So you may still have the same number of cases spread out so the hospitals won't get overflown. So in the same thing with the structural resonance, it's reducing that peak to a much flatter response. So you might have the same amount of vibrational energy, but it's spread out over a wider range of frequencies, and that tends to have a less annoying effect.
Well, but you still have resonance, right? It's 5%. If you look at the curve, it's going to be a 10 times magnification if you have 5% damping at a resonance.
Well, I also want to suggest there will be some resonance noise, but anytime you're talking about a variety of noise sources, it's the one that's going to control the noise that you actually hear is going to be the dominant noise source. And if you have the dominant, maybe the next dominant noise source, the third or the fourth, the fifth one after that is probably creating much less of a contribution. So if it's down in the way that decibels add together, if you have 2 decibel levels that are more than 10 dB apart, 60 dB plus 50 dB, you add those 2 together, it's 60 dB. I mean, once you're 10 dB down from the dominant source, it's really not making a contribution.
I understand it's logarithmic, but still there's, if you look at the literature, there's a lot of research into how to reduce the amount of growl, the rumble that you get from reinforced concrete. And so that tells me that it is noticeable. So it's not zero. And with these techniques, like you talk about this damping, it may reduce it, but it doesn't reduce it to zero.
Well, you're correct. You're correct. Doesn't reduce it to zero, but in the presence of the actual train, the wheel rail noise, the propulsion noise, plus the already ambient noise from traffic in the community, everything else, it's probably less than a significant amount. If we actually, did some sophisticated modeling, finite element modeling to predict how much the actual surfaces of concrete is going to vibrate and how much that the interaction with air would create audible noise, and we added that in, we'd probably find that it makes maybe less than a 1 or 2 dB difference.
So some people have instrumented up these viaducts and they see a handful of dB increase. Now, but that's one design, right? You're trying to predict a general number with some specific measurements on one design. So, but the point I'm getting is that if you were talking just about absolute estimates, it probably almost gets down to the noise floor of your calculation error. But this isn't just an absolute calculation of how much noise it is. This is for a down select, and the down select is a relative rating. And so when I pull up this chart and see that the viaduct has the same noise as something at grade, I know that's not right. There is some additional noise due to the re-radiation off that structure. And that structure will have some modes, and as the vibration goes through it, some of those modes will be excited, and there will be some effect. Now, I can't give you a number that it's 3.7 dB, but there will be some effect on top of that. And from a down select standpoint, that relative rating is important. Particularly with someone who's going to pick this up a year or two from now and look at this and not realize the context that this chart is delivered in. The fact that we've have a number that's hard to determine, so we've just zeroed it out. But yet only one design has that hard to determine number, and the other ones we know are hard zeros.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I would stand by my professional opinion, and actually having been near a lot of these, that you can, when you're standing near a metallic, a metal viaduct or bridge, it's very obvious. When you're standing near a more modern reinforced concrete structure, that's not the dominant noise source. What you're hearing really is the train, and I think the effect from the structurally radiated noise is a much lower effect. I understand what you're saying, that we're saying that it's small, it's probably not significant, but it only is attributed to this one alternative.
Exactly.
But like I said, in my professional opinion, it's not. It's probably buried deep enough below the direct propulsion, wheel rail, and highway noise. While it may be measurable, it's probably not that detectable, by people.
Okay, then I mean, on a similar vein, the fact that the parapets reduce the noise by 12 dB. Again, whenever that noise hits the parapet, it's going to be absorbed by the parapet and it's going to be funneled down into the structure. And any mode between the parapet and the ground is going to be excited. And some of that noise will re-radiate back up. So again, the parapets are going to be less effective than they would be if you had a parapet bounced.
Well, one of the assumptions that we made, included in the report, is that they would be acoustically absorptive on the interior side. And you have to be careful with these parapet barriers that are situated close to the train, because they're acoustically reflective. You're right. The noise from the wheel rail noise, in the case of the EMUs, the propulsion noise will basically reflect off of the inside of the barrier, then off the body of the train, and eventually back up over the barrier. So they can lose a lot of effectiveness if they don't have acoustically absorptive materials on the inside. But that's pretty much for that very reason, that's pretty much a standard arrangement on close-in rail noise barriers like that.
But even if 100% of the energy is absorbed by that parapet, it's still, Newton's third law tells you that something has to be supporting that, and the structure has to support that. So that vibration will go into the structure and be transmitted down. And any mode along the way that happens to have this, because it's a broadband vibration, and any mode between there and the ground will get excited due to the parapet. So the parapet is not making the noise disappear, it's just funneling it down to the ground.
I'm sorry, you're talking about the parapet barrier?
Yeah, the parapet barrier.
I would think the noise that's absorbed by the barrier is going to be, you're saying the noise that's absorbed by the barrier is going to create a vibration that will excite the structure?
Exactly. And there are papers in the literature that talk about this, but what's happening is that you're hitting this parapet with pressurized air at a certain frequency. And that is a force on that parapet, and that parapet has to be supported by something. So the structure of the parapet supports that, and that force, that vibration, goes down through the structure of the viaduct, and that any mode between the parapet and the ground will be excited if it has the right frequency.
Well, I would say the amount of energy, the acoustic energy being imparted into the barrier would be several orders of magnitude lower than the magnitude of the vibration being imparted into the railhead and then down through the structure.
So can I ask, for those of us who cannot speak at this level, what you guys are saying, Keith, is there something that would capture what you're trying to get at in a sentence, or are we missing a number, or kind of dumb it down for me? What is this report not saying that you're thinking it should say?
I mean, these numbers are hard to quantify, and I sympathize with that. And particularly, they're hard to quantify in a general design. This is, if you had a particular design, you could run a finite element on this and predict this. But I would say you would want to say what things have been zeroed out here. We know that they're non-zero, both the parapet and also the redegradation of the noise. Both those we know are non-zero, and say that these are assumed to be small but haven't been quantified. I would be happy with that if that was explicitly stated, so someone a year from now doesn't pick this up and think that this table includes all the effects.
Okay.
Right. I think that I said in the report, I believe that the wording that we added said that we'd assume that with the properly designed viaduct structure, that the additions of the structure radiated sound would not be significant. I don't know that I said zero. And I do recognize that, even a little bit of vibration will result in a little bit of radiated noise. But, if we're talking about 20 or 25 dB of noise versus 70 or 80 dB from the train itself, from the propulsion noise and the wheel rail noise, that would not be a significant contribution.
Yeah, I mean, the final sentence in that section says it should be noted that if one alternative is selected for construction, a more detailed ground vibration engineering analysis should be completed to develop a more detailed vibration impact assessment and provide detailed recommendations for vibration mitigation features to be incorporated into the final design. Does that cover it, Keith?
But my complaint is particularly with the viaduct. The viaduct is the one that is most susceptible to this. And if you're now looking at this table, the natural tendencies compared to rows, and some of the rows are identical when we know in reality they're not identical. So we haven't fully captured the viaduct's noise characteristics. Okay. And I wish I had a number to give you. I mean, it's a hard problem. Like I said, I sympathize.
Well, to get the exact number you're looking for would require a much higher level of modeling and analysis than we have incorporated here. I'll also point out that in the updated model here, you see that the viaduct with barriers option for Churchill is a full, if you look at the average here, it's 64.3 versus 58.6 for the underpass with barrier. So you're talking about, a few inches on the third place horse, I think.
Well, I mean, well, it depends. These numbers are operational, so a lot of stuff has been mushed together. So anyway, I think we're beating a dead horse here. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is the vibration attenuation. Is that this again is not consistent with the vibration attenuation. That the structure is acting like a dynamic isolator, and as a result, not as much vibration gets down to the ground. But
part of the reason for that is that you're distributing the vibration that hits the ground on the viaduct is limited to those where the posts go into the ground, and the vibration radiates out from there spherically. For the on-ground assumption, the vibration from the rail bed is continuous, so the propagation is cylindrical. and a spherical propagation is much more efficient than a linear propagation.
But for the homes that happen to be closer to the post, that actually could be worse.
No, because the energy is distributed spherically from a point source, but cylindrically from a line source.
But the energy going into that is more concentrated because it'll be all the forces, all the vibrations nearby are all funneled down into that one post.
Well, if the posts are about 100 feet apart, everyone's going to be near a post. Well, so and again, I'm going through. I'm basing most of this. This was not all developed from the ground up. All of this is based upon the FTA guidance for this, and their guidance is that the vibration for the viaduct, because you have fewer inputs into the ground, once every 100 feet or so, as opposed to a linear source, is that the vibration at the receptor location would be down on the order of about 10 VDB.
But if you're right next to that post, you would see a higher level than if you're right next to the rail. Because that post would be carrying more load. That one, since it's that for the rail, it's spread all along there, whereas for the post, anything nearby is routed down into that post.
Well, I guess I'll note your comment, but the basis of that the viaduct would provide would potentially reduce vibration at some of the nearer homes is based upon the FTA guidance, I guess.
What is FTA?
Federal Transit Administration.
Okay.
And this is based upon their 2018 FTA Noise Vibration Impact Assessment Manual.
So Keith, I'm gonna move on and give you some time to noodle what if you have a proposed amendment or something, noodle it, and that will allow us to kind of keep going and try to get some public comment as well.
Yeah, no, I'm done. But overall, Paul, despite my comments, I really think you did a very nice job with this. I appreciate it.
Keith, I know I got your emails. You brought up some very good points, and I'm familiar with your background, so I know that you're not just blowing smoke. But part of it is the level of detail that we can afford to bring to bear on this analysis is somewhat limited compared to.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Tony, I see your hand back up. Did you think of something else?
Just to talk about Keith's concerns, I think they're real concerns, and I think we should note, as you read, Nadia, from the paragraph, that we should be careful when we design that mitigation wall, that sound wall that's 6 feet high, and how that absorption material touches the wall will be important, but I think it's a down the road issue. But we should make sure that people remember this.
Great. What I'll say is that Keith and Tony and Phil, you guys are part of the technical review for the report. So I'll ask you to sort of make a note to remind yourselves that you want to put something about that in whatever comments you eventually want to put.
Yeah,
so,
I do believe we included an assumption that for the parapet barriers, they would need to be acoustically absorptive on the inside. And that's pretty much a standard design feature for this type of barrier. Not so much for a highway barrier or for a right-of-way barrier, but for these parapet barriers, because they're so close to the rail body that they need to be acoustically absorptive, or there will be a significant degradation in their performance.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see Dave Shen and then Phil.
Yeah, just a quick question. I just remembered something when I was reading through the report. You mentioned that the fencing of the backyards that were right up against the rail was wouldn't affect noise transmission because of the typical one we find there. And I was curious, is there some consumer available fence that could actually help mitigate sound from trains?
Well, there could be, and this is general. This comes up in highway noise a lot. People say, "Well, I have this, this board fence in my backyard," and I've actually gotten into conversation with realtors say, "Oh, you live next to a freeway, just put up a fence or put up a row of hedges. It'll suck up all the noise." But typical backyard fences are notoriously poor at noise reduction. Part of this is because wood fences almost always have gaps, and they have to have gaps so that they don't bust themselves up when there's changes in humidity. So they usually have small gaps, and even a small gap can let through a lot of noise. And even when they don't have gaps, sometimes you can do a good one with tongue and groove construction. That just the height of the wall is usually not enough, and especially I standing some of the backyards and watching the trains go by, you can see the top of the train right over the backyard fence. However, if you wanted to build, and we really couldn't incorporate any widespread assumption about how well the backyard fences were doing, because there's all different kinds. Some are just chain link, some are, you know, masonry block. So I would say the more massive, the more solid the fence is and the taller it is. So if you had a good 10-foot high masonry block wall, that would actually probably reduce noise in your backyard by a significant amount. Although maybe less so for hybrid and viaduct, where the noise source is elevated up in the air. But generally speaking, the type, you know, the stockade fence or the board fence, they don't do much. They're pretty acoustically transparent. If you actually did want to put something in your backyard that actually helps some, either like I said, a masonry type wall, or maybe a 1/2-inch thick board with tongue and groove slats to close up the gaps, would work better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Right.
I had gotten in conversation with a few people whose backyards did back up against it. We talked a lot actually about the house construction, but we hadn't considered fencing or a barrier between the yard and the train. So I'm sure the people who are on this, who've heard this, might get some more ideas about them for their own purposes. Thanks for that.
And not to say that the backyard fence can't help some, but the variation of the backyard fences and the propensity for them to be just thin board fences or stockade fences led us to make the assumption that we're assuming the backyard fences really aren't doing much on the whole.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Great. So Phil Burton, and then I think Keith, your hand's still up. I don't know if you have something else, but
can you hear me?
No,
yes, go ahead.
I'm done.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
No, Phil, your turn.
Okay. So Paul, you had mentioned, this is a quick comment almost in passing, about the rail ties being embedded in gravel. And could you kind of go over that point?
Yeah. A lot of times, and you think about a traditional rail line that you see, and I think if you go over any of the grade crossings, I believe that the line through Palo Alto is this way. When you look at the rail line, they are attached to a tie or a sleeper. Often those are wood, and then that doesn't just sit on the ground. It's usually embedded in like a gravel, and that's called ballast. So they don't put the ties just right on the flat ground. They put them on a ballast base, and that's to help kind of actually preserve the track, gives it a little bit of flexibility as the train rolls over, and that's pretty common practice. Now, for lighter rail things, like in a BART station, you look down at if you're in a BART station, look down at the tracks, they're usually affixed directly to the slab, right? And that's because it's a lighter rail and it doesn't have as much, although even those where it's a direct slab fixation, they usually have some for the thing that actually holds it down, the pin usually has a little rubber mat under it, so that it doesn't transmit as much vibration. And if you think about it, if you directly fix the steel rail to the concrete base, every time the train goes over, it's gonna move a little bit. It's gonna vibrate and deflect a little bit, and eventually that'll cause the concrete base to disintegrate. It maybe not over hours, minutes or hours, but over years and decades.
Okay.
So the ballast is on the, I'm sorry, just to finish the thought there, on the viaduct. Most of the viaducts that are designed to accommodate heavy rail vehicles, including freight trains, have a ballasted track on top of the concrete slab, and that also helps to reduce vibration.
Yeah. So first a quick comment, then a question. So the comment is that ballasted right-of-ways are usually used for drainage, certainly on top of earth fills or cuts or whatever.
Yes.
So the question is, when you considered the notion of sleepers, concrete sleepers, let's say, did you assume the most modern techniques in terms of elastomeric pads and other noise mitigation measures, as opposed to more traditional wooden creosote cross ties?
Well, usually you use the wooden ties on a at-grade installation. On a viaduct installation, you'd probably be looking at a concrete sleeper in ballast. I agree. The ballast actually serves a few functions, and you're right, drainage is one of them. And sometimes even on a viaduct surface, they'll even put a rubber ballast mat between the top of the hard surface of the viaduct slab and the ballast, put on top of it, and the sleeper's laid into the ballast.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Are there any other XCAP members who had a question or a comment? Okay, I think I'll go next and then I'll go to the audience. So the only, the 12 decibel reduction from the noise parapet was really interesting. I think the only thing that is misleading, I'm not gonna say we should change it because I think it, you know, really for the purposes of XCAP, we see the results. But table 5-1, which shows, you know, the different alternatives and the potential noise reduction. Later in 5-4, you added the part which XCAP requested, which is the potential benefit of adding a barrier for the at-grade alternatives and the underpass alternatives. And those potential reductions are not really kind of explained in the 5-1 chart because it doesn't really include those. So I just wanted to note that for those that are kind of reading along, but I do feel like it's well seen in the data that is in the subsequent in table 5.3 and 5.4. So I think that's helpful. And I would just like to echo what Keith said. I think this is great and super helpful. And thank you very much for incorporating all the changes. I did want to go back to one thing that you said, Paul. You said that the difference between an electric motor locomotive pulling cars and the EMUs is that the EMUs are quieter. And you said something about because the noise is down lower by the wheels, which can then be mitigated by these noise parapets. Did I get that correctly?
Yes, but those are actually two separate things. Just on its own, without the parapet or anything, because the power, the electric motors that actually generate the energy to move the wheels that move the train, instead of having them in one location that hauls the entire train, they're distributed throughout the train. And that allows them, I believe it has a lower noise level to begin with. But also because they're at that lower elevation physically, I mean, they're 1.5 feet off the ground as opposed to being 12 to 14 feet off the ground. If you have a 6-foot barrier and you have an electric locomotive goes by, the venting for the motor is still up at that high elevation, 10 to 12 feet up in the air. Easily, it's not going to get blocked by that 6-foot barrier. But on the EMUs, and this is not true of all EMUs, by the way, but the ones for this particular EMU, the traction motor is actually down by the wheels, about 1.5 feet off the ground. So the noise from that is well reduced by that 6-foot barrier. Right. So it's those two things. They're less noisy to begin with. They have a less, even if they're traveling just on level ground without any barrier, they're going to have a lower noise emission. And then that 6-foot barrier would work well for an EMU, but not as well for an electric locomotive.
Great. Phil, I see you waving again. You need to unmute yourself, Phil.
Okay, so let me make a couple of very quick comments. I've never heard of electric MUs that do not have the motors in the trucks, that is the wheel structures of the car. Diesel MUs may have the motors on the top of the roof of the car, the famous Bud cars.
Right, exactly. And that's what you're referring to. That's technically a DMU, of course, right?
DMU, yes. On the other hand, electric locomotives often have the motors inside the body of the engine, and they use mechanical drive to transmit the power to the wheels.
Yeah.
Whereas with the EMUs, they are just, the motors are directly geared to the axles. Just so that would explain the difference in the height of the noise source.
Yes.
Great. Keith, I see your hand up, and then I'm going to go to public comment. So go ahead.
A quick confirmation. When you did the calculations, like for the viaduct, that you're taking into account the fact that the viaduct is elevated and how the noise spreads. You have this first row, second row. That all those calculations include the fact that the viaduct is elevated. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're now going to go to any any comments from the members of the audience. I just want to remind ex-cappers and Paul, our speaker, that we take public comment. We do not answer questions from the public because otherwise we have a very engaged public and we would be here a long time. So I will ask that you not respond to anybody, but just hear their public comments.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, and so it looks like we've got 2 folks who have their hands raised. So you can have 2 minutes each, or it looks like we have 3. And I'll turn it over to Sylvia, who's helping me out here.
Thank you, Chernak. We have Susan Newman, Carlin Otto, Adrian Brandt in that order. Susan, you may unmute yourself now.
Thank you. Just a second now. I lost my notes, so I can't tell you what I was going to say. I was just really enjoyed the noise and vibration report. I thought Paul did an incredible job of making everything very clear, even to, a non-technical ear. I had the thought that it might be worth saying somewhere, I'm not sure whether in this report or in the XCAP report, that if the train increases go up as much as they are projected to go with the high-speed rail and the most advanced vision of Caltrain's future, it would wash out most improvements from not having the whistle and bells for the train stopping and from eliminating the diesel engine. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I'm just going to say this because I don't know, I don't think it should necessarily change at this point, but I thought it would have been nice to keep the summary suggestions, but to break apart the summary analysis to separate construction from operational noise. And maybe that's already there, I'm not completely sure. And I did have this one mystification as Paul was talking. In the discussion about, wait a minute, so I can find it. Oh yeah, the discussion about the fences that Dave brought up, which I thought was also very interesting. Paul made the comment that the more massive and solid the fence, the better it was for reducing noise. And then, though it might be less so for the viaduct or hybrid because the noise source is elevated. And that kind of blew my whole model apart, because my understanding was that the noise sources were low down behind the noise absorbing parapet wall and therefore, wouldn't be radiating. So I just say that. So when people do talk about it, maybe try to get that clear. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Carlin Otto. You may unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, I love this report. This is great information. On page 14, I would love to see a analysis of how that noise expands out to houses in rows 3, 4, and 5, because I fully expect that the noise will expand out way more from a viaduct than it would from a trench. I can imagine a trench that rows 1 and 2 would see it, would hear it, feel it, and then at row 5 there'd be nothing. But from a viaduct, they get almost the exact same amount of noise that you would at row 1. So I would really love to see this, because it helps people understand just how many people, what percentage of the population will be affected by each of the solutions. That's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Adrian Brandt, you may unmute yourself. Oh, Adrian Brandt,
I think whoever's got got to mute that one, and then let's see if Adrian can talk.
Sorry.
Okay, I finally received the unmute invitation. When you initially invited me, it was not there.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I tuned in a little late, so I may have missed some of the discussion about noise and vibration, but I wanted to chime in. It seemed like there was a lot of sort of pettifogging, sort of armchair analysis going on. We don't have to speculate all that much. Denver RTD has some very large, long viaducts that they built with very comparable electric trains running on top at Airport Road on their RTD Airport Line A. I'm looking at one now on Google Maps with a street view, and it's very tall. It's probably in the order of 40 to 50 feet tall, and has piers that look to be quite widely spaced. And so there are very real world examples, even in the Bay Area, of viaducts with trains running across, and we can see that you know what the noise consultant was saying is that when you have a train on top, the other effect essentially from a human perception point of view de minimis. So there's a 100-foot viaduct or a span in San Bruno on Caltrain. And there's a few others. There's some in construction right now, both steel and concrete in San Mateo. The trains are already running across the top of them as of a few weeks ago. So we don't have to speculate too much. We have BART viaducts. We have a VTA viaduct over by the Great Mall. And these are, for the most part, pre-stressed concrete on piers, very similar to what would be built in Palo Alto. So rather than sort of armchair quarterbacking and putting a million asterisks that are potentially motivated by biases against viaducts, I just would encourage some real world reality checks on the theoretical aspects. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like that's it for our speakers. Great. Going back to the panelists, Phil, you still electronically have your hand raised. Did you have a question or comment, or is that from before? Oh, I don't even see Phil. I'm going to guess it was from before. Greg, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll refrain from looking up pettifogging, but I do. One of the commenters made a point about why don't you show us how the noise from the viaduct will spread over a larger area? And this is a comment we hear frequently in public comments to XCAP. There is a widely held belief in Palo Alto that the viaduct will broadcast the train noise to a larger area, and that people who wouldn't normally hear the train will suddenly hear it if the train were higher. I don't recall if there's anything to that effect in the noise and vibration report, but I'd love to hear from our noise and vibration expert what the actual impact of that might be without requiring a giant additional study and additional mathematical modeling that would cost a lot of money.
Great. Paul?
Did you want me to answer that?
Yeah, that one you can answer. That's from the next.
Well, I think as obviously the further you get from the train, the lesser the noise impact is going to be, the noise level. And I think that we included typical locations for first and second row on each side. And I think the assumption was once you get out to beyond third and fourth row, you're getting more and more buildings intervening in between. And the difference and the impact is going to be less and less. So, you know, will you be able to hear the trains? And I think for the most part, I would venture to guess that the people who hear the trains now that are more than 3 or 4 rows back are hearing mostly the horn noise, maybe less so than the actual just rolling noise and propulsion noise that they would be hearing after the horns and bells were silenced. So, you know, it begins to get a little squishy and guessy when unless you're going to do a very detailed analysis. The precise and of course, as you from one house to the next, you know, is there a gap between you? And you know, when you're looking through the first row, is there a gap? Or are you right behind a giant 2-story apartment building? And that changes from, you know, constantly as you go up and down the corridor. So it would be kind of a squishy guess to begin with, and it wouldn't be very consistent depending on where you were back through the area. So I think that the train is going to be audible because it is a transient noise source, and it tends to be louder than the constant kind of steady state noise source in the community, but only for maybe 10 to 30 seconds at a time. So I think the answer is that the effect is much lessened especially between these different alternatives. And part of including the table that showed the absolute noise level, I think one of the conclusions is that all of these that result in a grade separation that eliminates the horn sounding is the big improvement. And then the difference between all the alternatives tend to be much smaller plus or minus improvements based upon the big improvement of reducing the horn noise.
But I think the question was specifically on the elevated alternative. I think because I think at grade, I can understand how there's, multiple houses in the way, but when it's elevated sort of the same for everybody. And in Palo Alto, typically we don't have structures over 50 feet, especially on the right of way. So I think that's the more specific question.
Well, I think just from a geometric standpoint, if you're in the second, if you're standing in your front yard in the second row, and you live on the second street back, you have a shot at seeing maybe the top of the train. But if you're 3 or 4 rows back, as that angle reduces, the chance that you can actually see the train and you're not getting a blocked line of sight is less and less. If you're a half mile away, there's no way you're going to see the train. If you're in the third row, maybe you might see the top of the train. But as you get further back, that angle decreases and you actually are starting to get a line of sight break by the intervening building rows. So I think that effect is lessened as the further back you go. That is the effect of the train being elevated.
Greg, does that help?
Yeah, it does help. I mean, assuming the line of sight break means an acoustical break as well. We hear this a lot, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we understood what the effect might be. So thanks.
Yeah, and it might be a suggestion for staff to sort of just anticipate that in future town halls and just generally in explaining noise. That might be.
I might also add that sound diffracts, sound bends around things, and if you're very close to the thing it's bending around, you might get a good reduction. But as you get further back, it's that effect is going to lessen. Sound is going to bend. You might hear it without even seeing it. And the fact that there are building rows in between, or the fact that the train is elevated, becomes less relevant, I think.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you for that, Paul. We really appreciate it. And then just point of order for Philip, do we need to officially vote to receive the report, or can we just let this stand how it is?
Thanks. I'm not sure that you need to take an action unless you desire to.
I think we're fine. I think it stands on its own. Unless anybody else has any objections, ex-cappers, we can move on to the next topic. I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm going to take that as we're all clear. Okay, great. Thanks again, Paul. We really appreciate it. And so now we're going to move to agenda item number 4. This is updated renderings and fact sheets for the Churchill Partial Underpass and the Meadow Charleston Underpass. So we've got, let's see, Millette or Etty. I'm not sure who's going to take it, or Peter. The show's all yours.
Yeah, so we have provided in your packet the updates to the renderings and the 2 fact sheets for the underpasses, and basically what those are based on are we had received comments from you a few weeks ago, and then on the 1st of July we had provided our response to comments. So all of those comments where we said we would take action and make those additions, that's what you're seeing in the fact sheets here today, as well as the renderings are those items that we responded that we would make some adjustments. So the adjustments on the renderings are fairly minor. The fact sheets have expanded quite a bit. We added a full page to each one, including right-of-way areas and the intersection diagram and et cetera, et cetera. So I can show them on the screen if you want, or we're just ready to kind of take your comments if that's what you prefer.
Does any ex-capper have a preference? Do you want to walk through? I think maybe I think the renderings are pretty self-explanatory unless anyone has a particular question. But maybe if you wanted to walk us through the kind of the new stuff on the fact sheets, that might be the best way to go about it.
Okay, I can do that.
And then obviously if any ex-capper has any questions specifically, they can always ask. While Millette's getting that together, I did want to clarify, I did have a conversation with staff the last time we were talking about the term fact sheets and whether these were fact sheets or they were sort of overviews. And staff informed me that this is sort of an industry standard in terms of how these terms are used. And so we're keeping that on there for that reason. So understanding that this is very early engineering. So I just wanted to clarify that for ex-cappers before Millette starts. So go for it, Millette.
All right, so I'm just gonna, so this is the beginning of the Meadow Charleston Underpass, and Elliot or Peter, I'm going from memory from the changes that we made, but I think the significant one on here is underneath this underpass here, we listed the things that were for the Meadow Drive Underpass overview looking southeast. So on the top left, we highlighted the things that aren't shown in the rendering that are shown in the plan view. I think there was also some minor edits to the text here. I think we added this sentence at the bottom with the intersection at Eli and the limitations on its turning movements.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, then this next page is the, on here we added the intersection turning diagrams. And I believe we also added some wording to the engineering challenges. I believe this one stayed the same, but on the other sheets, we did add some information there related to Caltrain right-of-way that you'll see in the next sheet. And I think we did also add on the estimate that we were it included both Meadow Drive and Charleston in the estimate. Both were included.
Millette, I see something about a fiber optic line. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a note that's been on all of our statements. There are several known fiber optic lines within the railroad right of way that we would know would need to be relocated, but we haven't estimated all those in the estimate at this point.
And is it my understanding that when there's a relocation of I'm going to assume for a second, and maybe I'm assuming incorrectly, but if that's a fiber optic line that belongs to a utility, I believe it's the agency who has to deal with the relocation cost. Ed, can you, I saw that Ed Shikata is with us. Maybe you can confirm. I think this is a conversation we had a long time ago, and I'm hoping you can add some color there.
Only if you might repeat the question. Sorry, Nadia.
No worries. Sorry, I totally caught you off guard.
Yep.
So we're looking at the fact sheets, and one of the, under the project costs, it says maintenance costs and relocation of fiber optic lines not included. And I remember a long time ago when we had the discussion about utility relocation, and if, for example, Caltrain or the city made improvements, other utility companies would have to pay for their own utility relocation. Of course, Palo Alto owns their utilities, but to the extent that there might be a utility in there that's not us, they pick up that cost, correct?
Depends on the franchise. And so I think in large measure that's true, but I suspect that caveat there is just to indicate what is and is not in the cost estimate, as I understand it.
Great, thank you for that. Nope. Go ahead. Sorry.
All right, so I think that was it on this page, and then on the next page, oh shoot, I think I went too far. Yeah, so here we did have some more space to add an additional rendering, which we did, and then we added these plan views that showed the property impacts. I believe we also went through and refined the noise descriptions in the criteria to be consistent with the noise study. And I believe we also updated some of the wording related to the clear and safe routes to school.
I noticed that under the noise and vibration, we asked for Paul to include in his analysis the option of adding a noise parapet at the at-grade alternative, and that actually did reduce noise. And so wondering how we can include a sentence in here that might indicate that that's a possibility here as well. Because these fact sheets don't capture that.
Yeah, we can add that.
And that would be the same comment for the Churchill partial underpass, but also for the Churchill closure.
Now, I would just guess that now I know you asked for us to look at that, but is that actually considered part of one of the alternatives now?
Well, I think the point is to be able to explain to folks that if you select one of these alternatives, an additional option is this noise parapet that does the following, right? And so without prejudging what we might say, that, you know, putting in there that that's sort of an option, you know, it's going to be an add-on option, right? And you might have to, I don't know what that does in terms of cost placements and stuff, but the fact that that's a potential alternative is important for us to highlight.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was something, if that's just something you wanted us to look at, or if that's something you actually wanted to present to the public as an actual option that you would be willing to consider. So
yeah, at the end of the day, it all comes down to money, but we're still supposed to talk about the alternatives. So
so I think that's it on the Meadow Charleston. I don't know if Peter, Elliot, if you went through the matrix, if I missed anything there and some of the highlights.
Yeah, I think you captured them all. All right, looks good.
All right, thank you. Then I'll move on to the Churchill Underpass. This one is very similar to what we had before. I think maybe just a few minor, you know, text edits on this, but I think the front sheet is similar to what it was before. And then on this sheet, we did add in engineering challenges, indications of Kellogg Avenue and its encroachment inside of the Caltrain right-of-way. And I think we also did add under neighborhood consideration, the loss of parking on Kellogg Avenue. And the big change here was the addition of the partial property acquisitions that would be required. And we were able to fit in, I believe, an additional rendering here on this page as well. And then the last page, we updated the intersection turning movement diagram, and then again made the changes in wording to the vibration, or noise and vibration topic, as and I believe we also edited the clear routes to more clearly talk about Kellogg.
We've also mentioned the width of the bike path in Kellogg. That was another comment.
Oh, yes. That was on the first sheet, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, here on this last sentence. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Elliot.
Great. Okay, awesome. I will, is that all, Millette? Is there anything else you wanted to say on that? Okay.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So ex-cappers, I will open it up to you for comments, questions, suggestions. Keith, I see your hand up first.
Okay, first, there's a typo here. Karen caught the fact that on page 3, if you look down at the bottom
of the Meadow or the Charleston one?
So this would be on Meadow. So this would be page 3 of the package. It mentions minimize disruption, duration of construction, and it talks about closing of Churchill. I think that's a copy and paste error. We're on, because this is for Meadow in Charleston. So.
Oh, thank you. You are right.
Okay, and then while we're on that page, on the upper right, the private property impacts. I really like the fact that we're being transparent here, but there's so much runway between here and wanting to acquire these properties that people may be unjustly concerned. So can we put something in there to say that this is tentative, or this is the current design, or something that this is not set in stone? Because if there's one thing that people get upset about, it's the concept of someone coming and buying their house.
Yeah, I think that's the status of all of our alternatives, right? They're all preliminary.
Yeah, so whenever we have this plot, I like the plot. I like saying this is our current best guess, but this best guess is certainly not set in stone. We should let the public know that this is very preliminary.
So maybe putting the word potential in front of the title private property impacts would be helpful.
I would like that.
I just don't want it to seem like if you do this alternative, these are likely. I don't want it to seem like, well, if you do this alternative, these are possible, but not necessarily, you know, that I don't know. It's tricky, but I do hear what you're saying. Millette, does potential in front of that word sound, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't have any qualms with that.
I think the only problem that we potentially have with that is people may think, oh, well, maybe there's another way you could avoid acquisition of the property.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
In some cases, there's really not. You know, those blue shaded areas are, you know, based on what we're showing now, that's a virtual certainty.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't really see any harm in saying potential here. I think it's in all likelihood, these are probable.
How about conceptual or something like that?
Yeah.
Conceptual might be good. What do you thought, Keith? Would that communicate to your neighbors? Like,
yeah, I would be happy with that. I just want something to communicate the fact that this is a preliminary design that's not finalized.
yeah, I think conceptual is probably the better one.
All right.
Yeah, but we'll let XCAP vote if anyone has anything different. I don't mean to suggest I get to decide. Keith, did you have anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, Tony, and then Carrie.
So my concerns as in the past are the bike ped issue, and thank you so much for making that bike ped path 20 feet wide. I presume that's the same in this Churchill alternative as with the other ones. My issue is that it's not so comparable as with the existing because of the slope, but thank you for making it 20 feet wide. I presume that's going to impact some parts of the cost, but I think it's easier to traverse and safer to separate bikes and peds. I'm still concerned about the cost and how, I mean, the slope at 8%. I think I don't fully understand how this feeds into the matrix, but in the matrix, these are shown as dark blue, and the pedestrian experience is not as comparable as what's existing now. So I think that should be a different color, but I think that's probably when we discuss the matrix, I can bring that up again. But I don't want this to be blessed and then say that's the matrix must follow.
Yeah, I believe we're calendared to do the matrix at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Tony put his hand out, so I'm going with Carrie and then Phil.
Hi. I really like a lot of these updates. The one piece of feedback I had worth sharing is there's some inconsistency in your legends from map to map, and that may cause confusion. So I wanted to encourage you to, you know, reserve a color for one kind of thing. So for example, on page 2, we have the fuchsia color, a magenta color being used for two different things right beside each other. So on one of them, it is partial property acquisition on Churchill, and on the other side of the page, it's pedestrian bike ramps and sidewalks. There you go, that's the part. So if it would be possible to be consistent throughout the fact sheets, I think that will really help people understand. And while we're on that subject, on that part there with Churchill and the Embarcadero bike path, it is hard to discern between the red and the magenta. So throwing that out there as well, just as a piece of formatting feedback. I know that's not exactly what you're asking for, but throwing that out there. Thank you.
So I'm not sure where you're, oh, the red and the magenta right next to each other?
Yes.
So there's, yeah, two pieces of feedback. One is if magenta means partial property acquisition on one map, it would be ideal to have it on all the maps.
Yeah, I got that one.
And then the other was an example on, any of these pages where you have red and magenta together. It is hard to tell the difference. I can see it on my screen, but I'm imagining what if it was printed out, or what if, there may be some people for whom it may be difficult to discern the difference between those two colors. If you're going to be relooking at colors, that may be something to consider.
I'm not seeing on here.
Okay, the bottom of
it's just the line for Caltrans right away.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's not a big deal, but I wanted to point it out just in case, because it is hard to tell the difference. And I'm looking on the bottom of page 2 where you have Churchill and Embarcadero, and it looks like the same color. And I was trying for a few minutes to figure out, why is the Caltrain right of way a partial property acquisition, right? Like, what's the relationship there? And I understand one's a filled block and one's a line, but because the colors are so similar, my mind automatically went to some kind of connection when there's not. I don't think there's an implication here that.
Okay, that's a fair comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Phil, you're next.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so first I just want to say that I think these new data sheets are really significant improvements. And in particular, I like the traffic movement because that really clarifies the issues in a way that's simple for people to understand. About the labeling of property acquisitions, something like conceptual, I have no idea what that means. If we said something like preliminary subject to further analysis, then I might know what's going on. So I would like to suggest that wording instead of conceptual or possible. Because as Peter said, right now, these property acquisitions will probably happen. Okay, those are my comments.
Thank you, Phil. Keith, your hand is still up electronically. I don't know if you had something else or if that was just a leftover.
I have some lag in my mouse here, and I'm muting and unmute myself repeatedly. It's just a leftover. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Did we have any other ex-cappers who had questions or wanted to make suggestions for the rail fact sheets? Okay, seeing none, I guess we can go to public comment, and I can always bring it back. So if you're a member of the public who'd like to speak on the items of the fact sheets or the renderings that have been presented, please raise your hand now, and we will do public comment. All right, I see 4 hands up, so you can have 2 minutes each. And Sylvia, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you, Chair Nayak. There are 4 speakers in this order: David Kennedy, Neva Yarkin, Carrie Wagner, Susan Newman. David Kennedy, you may unmute yourself.
First, I'd like to again thank the panel for your perseverance and hard work. Second, on the meadow crossing, it's hard to tell from the plan view or the rendering, whatever you'd like to call it, but it almost appears that meadow bends a little bit north as it goes across Alma. And if that's the case, is it possible to look at straightening that out and being able to add a lane as it goes under Alma so that you could add some turn function, add the left turn function? As I say, it's hard to tell from what you see, but it does look like Meadow may bend, and therefore there might be some space on the south side to move the over that direction. If that can't happen, I'd have to say that as a taxpayer, it's hardly worth the money to spend on that meadow crossing with only 3 or maybe it's 4 turn alternatives. That's a lot of money for not being able to do much there, other than you would get the grade separation for people that are on meadow, but otherwise it'd be very difficult. One last thing I'd sort of like to note, both on Meadow and on Charleston, there's been a lot of attention paid to the bike crossing of Alma. I'd just note that a couple of blocks further west, bikes and pedestrians, if they're going that far and if they're going to school, they will, are going to have to cross El Camino at grade. So whether that's worth taking a look at and not spending quite as much energy to do all the alternatives for bikes and peds, not having to cross Alma at grade, it might be something to look at. Thank you.
Neva Yarkin. Oh, you may unmute yourself.
Okay, this is comments. Out of the 3 options left for Churchill, partial underpass, viaduct, or closure, I feel the best option would be closure of Churchill and mitigation for Embarcadero and Oregon Expressway, both arterial roadways, not just because I live on Churchill. Closing Churchill, I feel, would be the safest, most direct path towards Palo, Stanford, and El Camino. The partial underpass option, Caltrains owns the right of way, and that could be a non-starter for this option. Other major engineering challenges, such as eminent domain, the area will be closed for 3 years, flooding at pumping stations, major utility relocation, and diversion of bikers, pedestrians going to Palo and Stanford. Closing Churchill would be the cheapest option left. Now's the time during the pandemic to make Palo Alto more environmentally friendly for bikers and pedestrians commuting over the railroad tracks. Let's follow the Paris plan, which has cut car usage, cut the carbon footprints, and reduce pollution inside the inner city of Paris. We could also follow this path and make Palo Alto a better place to live in for all of us. The time is now to think outside of the box and be creative with new ideas for living a healthier and simple way of life. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Carrie Wagner. Carrie, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for your work on this. I live in Charleston Meadows on Edley Avenue, and I bike the intersections of Charleston and Alma and East Meadow and Alma regularly. I have a lot of concerns about how the bike and pedestrian paths are constructed. Bikes sharing paths with pedestrians is a little tricky. Actually, it's very tricky unless there's some separation. I also have some concerns about the fact that the bike and pedestrian paths are only on one side of the intersection, especially at Meadow when the bikes are going. I realize this isn't happening right now, but when there's a whole peloton of bikes traveling to Gunn, they barely fit. I don't see how that's going to work the way it is going in either direction. And I also, I'm older, I'm getting older, I'm biking a lot now, and I have, I'm a little worried about the 8% grade. I'm not quite sure what that translates to, if that's similar to what the Cal Ave tunnel does, but 8%'s a little tricky for me to bike. My knees are getting older, and I think that probably speaks to a lot of us. And I appreciate your work with this. I hope you can, and I really hope you can address these concerns in the next few plan cycles. Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Susan Newman. Susan, you may unmute yourself.
Thank you. Let's see, I have some questions along or thoughts along the lines of the last speaker, and also a little bit about the wording just to consider. In both of the fact sheets, it says pedestrian and cyclist access will significantly improve due to mode separation, and that's for maintaining access to neighborhoods, parks, etc. And I think that's a little bit of a strong statement given the unresolved issues about the bike and pedestrian pathways. The grade is a really important one. The lack, whether or not there's separation between bikes and peds on at least the Churchill one, and how that's going to be done. I mean, there's just a lot of concerns that at least I have. And I had the thought the other day that one of the reasons Palo Alto is such a bike-friendly place is that it's pretty flat and people can get around, at all ages because of that. And there are definitely problems in terms of traffic and all of that. So I'm not trying to minimize that, but some of the tunnel designs worry me a little bit. And I'd like to know whether or not, as I talk to people in my neighborhood, if there's going to be an effort to address the 8% issue. Is that something that will happen before a decision is made or a recommendation is made by XCAP? Or is it just something that will end up, going into the report along with, other things that are open for further development? Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Karen Kolinsky. Karen, you may now unmute yourself.
Thank you. Having listened to the discussion thus far, I just learned that the new revised matrix sheets will come up at the next XCAP meeting. And so I would like to add to my request about a separate option for mixed meadow Charleston solutions with hybrid for meadow combined with underpass for Charleston, that be added as a separate option on the matrix sheets as well. Thank you.
The next speaker is Adrian Brandt. You may now unmute yourself.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on sort of tagging on to Tony Carrasco and some of the prior speakers. I am concerned with the neighborhood fabric and the bicycle pedestrian humid scaledness. Now, that's not a word, but I will continue. When I think of Palo Alto, the least pleasant places as a pedestrian, or as perhaps my nephews that commute by bike to Pali High, the least pleasant, most out of place, I guess, major civil works within the city would be the Oregon Underpass, and in second place would be the University Avenue Underpass. Those are not pleasant, nice places for people to stroll or walk. They work. Oregon less so. It doesn't work at all. It's got a terrible little, narrow, sort of afterthought-ish bike tunnel over at Cal Ave. But those are horrible mistakes that I feel like we're going down a road where we're potentially considering making these god-awful, not human-scaled freeway sort of out of place for a nice suburban community underpasses with steep grades, putting pedestrians, in the case of Churchill, the partial or the incomplete underpass with the big detour, going around and going in a hole and popping up and quite circuitous, not nice. I much prefer, and I think all urban design, pedestrian-oriented urban designers would prefer to keep bicycles and pedestrians at grade. And I think that Churchill could be kept at grade. And if the tracks are up and out of the way, completely up and out of the way, we could have a bike pedestrian cycle where they could cross without any motor vehicles making any movements. And so that would be my preference. I think those drawings are horrible. And I can't imagine that we're considering putting essentially a freeway wall in downtown Palo Alto. So thank you.
Okay, that looks like it for our public comment. So I'll bring it back to XCAP. I was going to ask whether it's possible to get clarification from Millette or Peter or somebody about the % grade for the bicycles. And I was wondering whether, since this question seems to keep coming up, whether you have a by the numbers section on each of the sheets. And one of the facts is the pedestrian bike ramp is 20 feet wide. I'm wondering if that might be a good place to put what the percentage of the grade is for whatever the bike crossing is under each alternative. Maybe that's a way to.
Yeah, I think this question came up last time we spoke, or maybe the meeting before. So I believe most, if not all of them are, I know some of them were based on 5% grades. I'd have to go back and look at some old exhibits. For example, the underpass on Meadow for the separated ped bike path, I'm pretty sure that's 5% grades coming in and out of the underpass underneath Alma and the track. Same for Charleston. But I think there were some others, for example, the ascension from the tunnel at Kellogg, I think that was based off of 8% with landings, which still meets the ADA standards. So we could certainly design that for 5%. It just means the ramp will have to be a little bit longer. So I don't think that should be a deal breaker for any of these. I mean, there would be some just additional impacts, but nothing. It's not like it would require extra properties or anything like that. The ramps would just have to be long.
I think whatever can be done to encapsulate what is done in the renderings and the plans, and you know, if one of them changes, that you could say, well, it's currently at this, it could be this other thing, but it would have this additional impact, you know, that could have an asterisk next to it. But I think the important ones are really the % grade, because I think folks are confusing that the 8% grade is for the cars and the 5% grade is for the bikers, particularly on the Meadow Charleston alternative that comes to mind, because my recollection is the same, is that it's 5%. And that's a pretty significant difference, especially because we have a lot of young kids going through there and inexperienced bikers. So whatever we can do to really highlight that on these fact sheets, I'll leave it to you guys about what makes the most sense. I just noticed that the by the numbers paragraph seems to have a little bit more space underneath it. So just to make maybe Elliot's job a little easier, that might be a good spot for it, but I'll leave it up to you guys.
Okay, we can take a look and provide clarity about that.
And then Keith, I see your hand up.
Yeah, to continue on that, the other thing that bothers me is when you have the % grade and we cite the maximum, that maximum occurs for a very short period of time.
That's right.
And so that's really deceptive, because then people think, oh, I'm going to be 5% grade for the whole time, or they're really going for 5% grade for all of 10 feet. And
well, the pedestrian, those ramps actually do extend for a significant length, but the roadway grades are usually just for very short distance, the maximum grade.
Is there any standard way of describing that without showing a plot? Is there any terminology that we can use that would?
We could probably add some language about, for example, the Kellogg Underpass is based on X% over this length.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I don't think anybody is caring about whether the cars are going 8% or 7% for any distance. It's really all about the bikes and peds.
Right, understood.
Okay, and then I had a different question. These, how mature are these? Are these going to be modified at all? Because one of the things that I had sent in a suggestion about, one thing that bothers me is that Meadow only has 3 of the 8 turning motions, and that bothers people in community, and that bothers me.
Yeah, I'm going to let the city respond on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's coming up later in the staff update that you're referring to, Utah.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, we can table it till the staff update, then we'll discuss this then. Okay.
Is there a reason we should hold that to staff update? Ripon, do you want to talk about that now? I mean, it seems timely to talk about it now.
Sure. In response to the XCAP's request, city did ask our traffic consultant to review the operation of the off-ramp and on-ramp intersections on Meadow and Charleston under various traffic control conditions, maybe stop sign, yield controls, and/or traffic signals. The preliminary results came out, and it did show that it may be able to work and allow for additional additional movements at these intersections. What we will do is we will update that additional information in the next meeting, which is on the 22nd, and our traffic with the traffic update report. So we will include that analysis as a part of the draft final report for the traffic and include that information. So Keith, what we can say is that stop sign and or traffic signal or yield control would work to allow for additional movement. So the eastbound left will be able to work in those directions, and so that could be accommodated.
Okay. And the fact that we have a stop sign, maybe we should discuss to the rest of XCAP what my suggestion was, is right now there's no way if you're going from El Camino towards Alma on Meadow to take a left onto Alma. And there's a lane that goes under Alma, but it can't turn left at all because we don't have a left turn lane. So instead, just put a stop sign there. 2 blocks back at Wilkie Way, there's a stop sign. And so then that works, and that already meters the traffic. So if you already have the traffic metered, you put 2 all-way stop signs at both of the ramp coming from southbound Alma to Meadow, and also from Meadow to northbound Alma. And that would give you all 4 turning capabilities there. You still can't access southbound.
Yeah, I mean, Keith, initial analysis shows that even the yield control will work. So we can look at those possibilities, and based on recommendations, we can make those additional movements at that. So the westbound left or the eastbound left will be able to make with even the yield control.
So that's great that'll come at the next report, but that would then change these intersection turning movement diagrams that are on the fact sheet.
Correct. So we will then make those minor changes on the fact sheets as well as on the layouts.
And just to make sure everyone understands, the bottom line is that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, anyone, but this would allow for 6 of the 8 turning movements to be accomplished.
At Meadow and 5 of the 8 at Charleston.
So just to be clear, we're talking about by changing the traffic signaling is all we have to do in order to enable these traffic movements, or is there additional movement of concrete and changing of property lines and things like that required?
No, mostly the striping changes.
Really? Okay, cool.
Yes. And also to follow up on that Alma and Alma Village intersection, so the U-turns would be able to be accommodated, but that will be only for passenger vehicles. So small cars will be able to do that, and not large ones. So that accommodates that additional movements, because you would be able to make a U-turn for northbound Alma at Meadow, and then come back at the off-ramp to make left or right turn.
But have we been able to figure out a way to restore access to that apartment building, or is that still not a possibility?
Yeah, that's still not possible due to the elevation difference. That parcel is going to have to get acquired. That's shown on the fact sheets.
Yeah, I know. Okay, thanks.
So just for Ripon and Philip, so for the next agenda, we should just be sure to add either as informational, or if we need to agendize it again, just another update to these fact sheets to make sure we're seeing the latest version that captures whatever else is going to come out in that traffic report.
So, the fact sheet and matrices will be updated, and, for Meadow and Charleston would be updated probably there after the 22nd meeting, soon thereafter. So we were under the impression that you will start deliberating the following week. So if you are starting with the Churchill, then we would be able to provide you by the time you have the,
Okay, great.
So you get to the Meadow.
Wonderful. We can work it out on our own. I just thinking forward so we can remember later.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay, great. Keith, did you have anything else?
I want to talk offline with Ripon about, you mentioned about the lights and some of the details, so I understand what you're saying, but overall I'm happy.
Yeah, we have an updated traffic report that's coming to our next meeting. So the matrices and the traffic reports are being agendized for our next meeting. So we'll all get to talk about it. Okay, Keith, if there's nothing more, then I can go to Phil.
Okay, so first, like Keith, I was also very concerned about the 3 only turning movements at Meadow. And I found the comment about striping as a way of increasing the turning movements. That has me concerned. So can we accomplish that without degrading the level of service through those intersections? That's my question. The last point I want to make is regarding the bicycle and pedestrian ramps. Do we have any reference points from ADA guidelines for acceptable angle, acceptable grade limits? And can we call those out?
Yeah, the acceptable grade limit is 8.33% as long as you have landings for every rise in elevation of 30 inches. So about every 30 feet, you'll need like a 5-foot landing. Similar to what you see like in a ballpark ramp, like at Oracle Park, the switchback ramps that go up and down. I believe those are very similar, the 8% for 30 feet, and then there's a flat area.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with the speaker who said, well, her knees are getting older, so maybe 8% is a bit of a challenge for bicycling.
On your second question, Phil, just to answer that, the LOS is being evaluated, but our preliminary analysis shows that the LOS will be in at acceptable levels.
Okay, so I guess my question, Ripan, is why wasn't this designed with 6 movements? Why didn't we see this originally? Why are we seeing this only now? Because several people have raised an issue about it.
So what I have found is,
and I know that may not be a fair question to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah, the typical left-hand moment requirements come into the picture when you have more than 100 vehicles in any direction for left-hand pocket for the left-hand pocket establishment. But in this situation, when we look at the intersection as a whole and separately evaluated it, it would work fine because of the opposing direction traffic that will be coming in the through lane in the opposing direction. So overall, the intersection will perform.
So I think what you're saying is that given the volumes through the intersection and the fact that we may not have a separate left turn lane, at least that's what I think you're saying, that we can still achieve we won't have too many turning movement conflicts.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right.
So
there will be a gap, enough gap. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say we have all of next week to be able to dive deep in once again into our favorite traffic study, so we can table that for that.
Yeah. So Keith, let me just say that when you have your call with Urban, can I join you on that?
Okay, I was just going to do email, but a call might be more efficient.
All right. Email's fine. Just copy me on the email. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I'd like to add that the traffic consultant will be here next week, and he would be able to answer more in-depth questions on those issues.
Yeah. Okay, great. So then I have Tony and then Greg.
I have a slightly different angle and what I think residents will want to know. And that is that the gridlock happens at about 12 trains. And at 16 trains, it's going to be even more gridlocked. And I think the public is not quite aware about this condition that they're going to face sooner or later, but I don't know when that is. But I think alerting the residents of the city that the east-west across the tracks is going to get gridlocked is an important issue, and we should be explaining it somewhere in the fact sheets. It'll particularly affect some of the construction techniques, or the alternatives that take longer will probably be worse off by a lot. And so that's an important flag that needs to be somewhere in these fact sheets. The gridlock is not a pleasant thing, and I think we're going to have to bear up with it, but it needs to be flagged early, and we need to plan and prepare for it. I think staff needs to prepare for it, and council needs to be aware of this situation that's coming.
So there is a fact sheet that was in our original group that's called Connecting Palo Alto that talks about what the plans are for expanding Caltrain service and what that means for Q-Links if nothing is done. So I do think that topic is covered in that fact sheet if you haven't visited that one in a while.
I'm holding it in my hand. So it does talk about it it has Churchill as an example. It does not talk about Meadow in Charleston, because I think at the time there hadn't actually been a Meadow in Charleston traffic study. We had been more focused on the north. And I'm not going to suggest, because I know it costs more money to show the similar thing for Meadow in Charleston, but I did want to point out that there is something explaining unclearable queues, at least related to Churchill, as a good example in the, as Millette said, the Connecting Palo Alto fact sheet. It's this one.
We could certainly add some wording that there would be similar circumstances in Meadow Charleston.
Yeah, it's just going to be an annoyance down the road, right? So people need to prepare and know that it's coming.
Great, Greg?
So going back to grades, yeah, a sustained 8% grade, although it may be ADA compliant, is pretty unpleasant for a sort of, not serious cyclist. I wonder if the PABAC or some other bicycle organizing coalition in Palo Alto could give us a guidance on this, just as Caltrain has given us guidance on what's a reasonable grade for their trains. I don't think the ADA is really the right people to ask for this. And I think we actually, in this particular case, I bet we have better expertise in Palo Alto than they do in Washington. So let's ask one of those folks to give us a number.
Philip, I think we got a number, right? It's 5% is their preferred max, and
that sounds great to me too.
Their favorite is 0, but I believe that was the number. Philip, am I remembering that right? Do you remember?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the number actually that Elizabeth brought up many months ago, because I think at one time had the Meadow Underpass, because we were trying to minimize the impact to Park Boulevard. So we were showing 8%. She said, please change that to 5, and we did.
Yeah, I mean, 5 sounds reasonable to me. And if we were to red flag any parts of it that are greater than 5, just like we're red flagging any part of the track that's greater than 1%, that would probably be helpful. Cool, thanks.
Great. Okay. I don't see any other ex-cappers with comments. So with that, I think we're done with this item for today. Thanks again to the AECOM team. These are getting better and better every time. So we really appreciate all your hard work and all of your changes on these. And thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to move to XCAP member updates and working group updates. This is item number 5. And this is more just internal housekeeping. I did get an update, and actually maybe now this is a good time to talk about our writing of the report and where we are on sections. So Philip, this might be a good time for you to talk about what we were talking about offline in terms of the ability to use Google Docs to be able to edit this report.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I guess what I'll be talking about is our inability to use Google Docs for offline work on this document. Unfortunately, we spoke with legal, and despite the fact that some of the Brown Act requirements have been temporarily lifted, this would not be something that we could do. And just to make sure everyone understands what we are talking about, we're talking about having a document that every member of the XCAP and members of the public could see, so that it's a transparent document, transparent process. That would be considered per legal a serial meeting. So that's not a possible avenue for us to take. So with that said, unless a member of the XCAP has a better suggestion, our recommendation would be to, for each member to work on their chapter or work with your partners on your chapter or section, and then pull a document together or send a document to staff, and staff will put it all together and bring it as a draft document to the XCAP. And at that point, the XCAP could provide comments or feedback to be incorporated into the document in order to create your final document.
And Philip, I've never done this before. What happens if so the first step is somewhat easy. We send everything to Sarah, I guess in this case, she pulls it all together for us. But now, there's 9 of us, and each of us has a different edit to the same paragraph. Then what? is that something that then Larry and I get to rectify? And I see Larry has generously raised his hand, so I'm gonna jump to him and hear what he has to say about it.
Yeah, so I think what we would have to do is potentially we'd have to put take all of the edits that would occur and let XCAP decide what's the most appropriate edits or which edits are appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah,
Larry?
I'm not really sure if there's a different path that's possible. Maybe Larry has a better suggestion.
I think our committees are 2 people or less now. Is that right, Nadia?
Yes, I believe they are.
Okay. Well,
Well, some cases there's
so
3.
up to 4 people can participate in the. Excuse me, I have my phone rang. Sorry. Well, I'm assuming 2 for the moment. That I think the process should be that the committee would submit that to Nadia and me, or if it's a committee of 3, then maybe just to Nadia, but or the me alternatively, not both of us. And so the draft would go through at least 1 level of editing, and then we had a meeting, hopefully that the edits would then, since it's already been through 1 level, that we'd have a modest level of editing at the full committee. I think that would work for us.
Great. Okay. Phil, I saw your hand up, and then Carrie.
So, Philip, I have a question for you. Assuming I'm working with, let's say, 1 other person or 2 other people on a section of the report, just my section, how does using Google Docs for 3 people out of 9 constitute a serial meeting?
That would not. So you certainly can within your groups. The concept that we're referring to that would be a serial meeting is if all of the XCAP members could comment in all of the different sections. So for instance, if you were working on a document, everybody in the XCAP could also provide comments. And also what we had discussed is we were hoping to not have the Brown Act interfere with that process, to make the document public, so that anybody, so that we present a link at the XCAP meeting and say, this is our Google document that anyone can view. However, legal said that we cannot do that.
Okay,
So yeah, you within your group can definitely work through Google Docs, as long as you're not sharing to, I guess it's more than 4 people.
So when I think of the writing process, I think that in order not to embarrass myself, there's a considerable amount of work that has to take place just within my little sub-team before ready to show anything to anybody. And so I hope that I'd like to just bring out the point that based on what you just said, we're free to use Google Docs within our subgroups. It's just as that merge document is the one that's subject to Brown Act serial meeting issue.
Yeah, I'm confirming that that is correct.
All
I
right.
would say that the limit should be 4 people, but if it stays within your working group or your subgroup that's your section, you should not have any issues.
All right, that's a much more comfortable answer. Thank you.
Great. Carrie, followed by Greg.
Thank you. Yeah, it's too bad that we can't do it, but I really appreciate you all looking into that as an option. We should. There is a technology related public meeting bill going to the state that we might want to pass this as information on. I'm happy to do that because it is an opportunity for us to use technology, but I will understand that was the decision that was made. However, when we to Vice Chair Klein's point, when we do put it together, how done will the document be? And I just wanted to throw out possibly another angle, because I know we don't have a lot of time for a multitude of iterations, is when can we hand off our chapters to staff and staff can put them together and do a first pass as far as proofreading goes? Or is that something we have to do as the whole XCAP?
Well, to answer your first question, yes, definitely you're going to hand off the chapters, I would say, to staff, and we'll put it all together. Yeah, we could do a certain level of proofreading. I mean, certainly we'd make sure there's no spelling or grammatical errors.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Like
I feel like it wouldn't be worth another iteration of an XCAP meeting time to do those kind of line edits.
Right. Yeah, I just hesitate to go beyond that. Our intention would be not to modify the intent of the writing. But yeah, we can certainly do that. Staff can definitely do that.
Okay, that might save us, one meeting. I don't know. Okay, and are we doing the whole updates? Or are we just staying on this document process at the moment?
We can go the whole updates. Go for it.
Okay. I haven't had a chance yet to meet with David and Young, but I am working on the an alternative way to view the matrix. And I have been looking through my email. I remember an XCapper had said they wanted to take a look at this. I've had plenty of input from outside the XCap, but was it Phil or Greg that can you remind me if one of you wanted to look at this?
I was interested in the sort of more digestible matrix. I would be happy to have an opinion or two and take a look at it.
That would be fabulous. I would appreciate that, and I'll reach out to you later.
And Carrie, I would like to as well.
Well, so
Okay, Tony.
You have a maximum of 4. So you got to pick there can only be 3 friends. Carrie can only have 3 friends on this.
Well, you've already seen it, Chair. So
yeah, exactly.
It'll be
right. So I
Tony.
too. But I will say for process perspective, Carrie, the draft of whatever you're going to put out would be due. If we see it at the next meeting, it's due tomorrow.
Yeah.
And unless it's going to get pushed to the following meeting, and I have to just powwow with Sarah and Rippon and Philip to figure out the logistics of what the next meeting will be in terms of how long will the traffic report take, because we love traffic in this group. And just making sure that there's enough time in the meeting, because we have the traffic report but we do have the overall matrix conversation, and so it would be useful to have, but the actual matrix we have may suck up a lot of time as well. So we'll be flexible, but yes, you're not very timely. Deadline would be tomorrow afternoon. So just
fantastic. I think it'll be all right. And so this brings us full circle to another question for Phil. And I'm not sure if this angle was covered in your prior conversation with legal, but can documents that we use and share in this meeting be Google Documents?
So I'm not sure what you mean by that, documents that we use in this meeting. Do you mean documents that we've previously provided, or?
No. So the item that I wanted to share back with the committee is a interactive.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, document. I know what you're talking about now. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so I understand that it's an interactive Google document. I'm sorry that I totally forgot about that. That can be shared as a Google document. It's just the XCAP can't, as a group, provide comments on it and do editing to it before
outside of the meeting.
Outside of the meeting. That's right.
Okay. All right. That at least gives us permission to continue down the current path, and I will reach out to Greg and Tony right after this meeting. Thank you.
And Carrie, if I could just say, it would be most helpful for Sarah, who helps us do the agenda, to have like a nice, neat bit.ly URL that'll just make it easy to go to. But then also, if there's a way for you to either PDF it or have something printed, because presumably if we were at a public meeting and someone wanted a printed version and did not have access to Google Sheets, they would need to be able to see that. So that's
okay.
An added wrinkle for you is to figure out how all that, the lovely Dropboxing that you've been able to figure out prints out. And I don't know how to answer that.
I got that. We'll get it. All right. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts? Okay. Thank you. Bye.
See it. Thanks for taking that on. Greg.
So it would be really helpful, since it sounds like if we do this wrong, we are not legal, for really specific instructions on how to do this. For instance, if I am writing a doc and I create a Google Doc, which would be my preferred way to do it, who exactly should I share it with when I'm ready to have it be included in the staff report? Or do I need to turn it into a PDF and email it to you so I haven't shared it with more than 4 editors, that sort of thing? Just if someone could just say exactly, this is exactly what we want you to do, you know, make a copy and paste it into an email is fine, but just let me know.
I'll make it. Yeah, I guess I can make that clear right now. If you just email it to staff, we can put it into a combined document. And from my perspective, it doesn't matter if you send it to me as a Google document or a Word document. I think PDF would be actually less preferable because that makes it more difficult to edit. So
so no more than 4 XCAP members who can edit the doc or comment on the doc is the important thing. Okay.
That's right. Cool. Yeah. And then if you send to staff, you know, Sarah and myself and Ripon, or even one of us, the document, we'll make sure we all coordinate and get it packaged together and do that preliminary spelling and grammar check and all of that, and package everything together. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Larry, I see your hand.
Greg, I think what I was proposing earlier is a second level of committee participation before we submit it to staff. And that's what Nadia is reserved for her and me right from the start, if you go back to what she prepared. And there's a reason for that. And that is that we need to have some consistent voice in what we're going to be presenting to the public.
So then I should share it with no more than 2 other XCAP members, and then when I'm ready, share it with either you or Nadia, but not both?
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was really, really specific, since it sounds like if we get it wrong, we're, you know, doing bad things. Okay.
How about I'll do this? I will get with Philip and Larry, and we will write out specific instructions so that we can then send that out to the group, and everybody will be clear on exactly how.
Okay.
Because I think
sounds perfect, Nadia.
I think it's going to be a little bit easier that way, and you know, then everyone understands what's happening. I also, as you guys all know at this point, I feel like you're all involved in my remodel. I'm still waiting to see what happens with my time frame. So I also want to think about, you know, when does this big package arrive, and what am I going to be able to do with it when it comes? So it may very well be that the first iteration all goes to Larry instead of me, and then I help at the second half of this. So, you know, keeping in mind that it'll be flexible, but I think I'll work with Philip and Larry to come up with at least a memo of what we're expecting, and then you know, the bottom line for the public who's watching this meeting is that you will be seeing lots of different drafts of things that will, you know, be made public at various points. There is not any, you know, secret meeting going on, and all the different elements of the draft report will be seen before the final report is out there. So I think that's the most important thing that I'd like everybody else to hear. So, Phil, did you have something else? Phil, your hand was up from before. Did you need anything, or nope, you're good. Okay, great. All right, as for staff, is there anything else besides that Google update that we should be aware of?
No, that's it. So those were the 2 items that we wanted to share with you.
Great. Okay, awesome. And that's it. Ed, did you have anything? I know you're, thanks for making it to the meeting. I know you're super busy these days, so we're lucky to have you.
No problem. Happy to catch up and kind of see XCAP in action.
Ed, we had a question earlier. We were talking about when is our update for council, and I think Philip and Ripon had said that we had left it squishy. That would be September, October. I didn't have an offline conversation with the mayor at some point, and so you may want to check in about, you know, where they want to order us based on their priorities as well. So I just want to throw that out there for you.
Okay, all right, and I'll chat with Philip on that as well. Happy to. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I think with that we are done. On the one day that we actually extended the deadline from 3 to 6 p.m., we're done at 5:30. How about that? That was the trick, guys. So thank you to everyone for participating. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next week. And thanks to Sylvia and to Nate and everyone behind the scenes who's been helping us, and Sarah. We really appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you.
I know.
You.
Bye.
Bye.